Côte-Saint-Luc ensemble. I'm looking forward to an amazing 4 years. I want to thank you all, and here we go. Let's start the ride.
That was the voice of rookie Côte-Saint-Luc Mayor David Torgman presiding over his first city council meeting earlier this week. The engineer won the mayor's job officially on November 17th in Côte-Saint-Luc, one of Canada's most Jewish municipalities where over half the residents are Jewish, but only after a court-supervised recount, and it was very close. He ousted longtime political leader Mitchell Brownstein. Torgman is an observant Jew. He wears a kippah, as do several other Côte-Saint-Luc councillors. And while that city has long been a fierce opponent to Quebec's Bill 21, which has, since 2019, banned some public sector workers, including teachers, judges, and police officers, from wearing hijabs or turbans or kippahs, so far, Quebec's provincial secularism laws have not targeted elected politicians. But religion and security issues for Jewish residents were a key issue in the recent municipal elections in the Montreal area, particularly public prayers on the streets, because of the anti-Israel protests since October 7th and growing concern in wider Quebec society about a particular feature at some of these protests when Muslim worshippers stopped traffic to hold prayers. Now, though, it appears the province is about to crack down on this and more, with yet another new secularism bill expected to be tabled this week. So, will that make it safer for the Jewish community? Will Montreal's new mayor, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, be better for the Jews than former mayor Valérie Plante was? And where do Jews fit in as Quebec continues to move away from the traditional Canadian ideals around multiculturalism?
And it aims for national integration with three values at its core, three targets: secularism, gender equality, and French. Three values to unite all Quebecers and to use as a model to integrate newcomers. And that, along with the three new secularism bills, and along with changes we're expecting to see to the Quebec Education Code to accommodate those values, is going to put Quebec in a very distinct place.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, November 26, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Well, I'm back at work here at the CJN after an extended family vacation. We were in Vietnam and Japan these last few weeks. And boy, was there a lot of news to catch up on when we got back, starting with Quebec, where the province continues to bring in more rules to make religious symbols and clothing illegal in public life. While some observers are seeing this as an assault on freedom of religion, Quebec's government wants people to be free from religion while they attend public school or interact with public employees. The newest round of bans is supposed to come down on Thursday, only about a month after an earlier law called Bill 94 was passed. So to get the lowdown on what to expect, I'm joined by our CJN Quebec correspondent, Joel Chaushu, who's been covering the developments.
Salut, Ellen. Happy to be here.
Good to have you. So can you bring us up to speed on what you've heard is coming down the pipeline?
So, yes, you are correct. This is the triple down. This is Laïcité 3.0. It will be its third piece of secularism legislation. Most listeners and viewers and readers of the CJN might be familiar with Bill 21, which was passed in 2019, effectively banning kippahs, turbans, and hijabs. Bill 94, which was given assent earlier this year, extended that ban throughout the entire school system, throughout the entire public education network, extending to cafeteria workers, parent volunteers, daycare personnel, janitors. It also imposed a ban on face coverings in the elementary and high school network, as well as banning the use of school property for religious purposes, meaning facilities couldn't be rented out in evenings and weekends for religious purposes by local mosques, churches, or synagogues. And the Quebec government was very clear that there was more coming. Now, what we're expecting to see is a total ban on face coverings from daycare through to university. That means no niqabs or burqas, Now, I don't know how big an issue burqas are in the education system, although niqabs you can see in Montreal, and you can see them here in Côte Saint-Luc as well. So that will not be allowed on school property. The
By
government
staff, we're not talking about parents picking people up or what have you.
by anybody. Parents coming in will not be allowed to have a face covering. What's also going to be banned are halal-only food menus for daycares, the subsidized daycares, so that toddlers have a choice in what they're eating. Prayer rooms in colleges and universities out. That's a very a big issue in Montreal, particularly in the English cégeps in Vanier and Dawson. As you know, the Quebec government launched an investigation into the goings-on in Vanier and Dawson, what the former education minister described as a toxic and explosive climate, all surrounding the Gaza-Israel war. Now,
Okay, let's just pause for 1 second because there's a lot to take in. I want to
sure,
make sure I
sure.
understand.
There's more.
This sounds like it was all more secularism, but with a sort of veiled, and I'm not using that as a pun, targeting of a certain population. But tell me how this would have also impacted Canadians who are Jewish, visibly Jewish.
Well, I don't know how much it will. There are rooms in universities and cégeps where Hillel students gather, and if they want to have a Shabbat event, does that necessarily constitute a religious event or a prayer room? So a lot of these finer details will have to be worked out, and I haven't seen the legislation yet. But we do know that along with some of the restrictions on accommodating holidays, that may affect Jewish staff in the public school system. There are no accommodations for absences, for religious holidays, for students either. Now that's an important element because the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CIJA, had proposed to the government that they offer a blanket 10-day religious holiday accommodation, provided that parents provide those calendar dates by the first day of the school year to the school staff. But the government said no, and they're also doing away with accommodation for staff as well, apart from those already included in the respective collective agreements by staff. Now, we know that schools and principals can be very flexible and creative in how they schedule assessments, exams, and homework, so I don't think there's much concern about that. As for the continued prohibition of religious symbols on staff, how big an issue that is for observant Jews, I don't know. I don't know how many observant Jews are planning to apply to work in the public school system, because remember, staff who are already, there's a grandfather clause for both Bill 21 going back to 2019 and for Bill 94 going back to earlier this year. So people can.
It'll only affect new hires or promotions.
So there's the rub. If you're somebody wearing a hijab or a kippah and you want to go from teacher to vice principal, you can't do it if you're going to keep wearing your kippah.
We got to wait and see, as you said. But what about public street prayer?
Correct. So
this is a huge thing in Quebec,
Yeah.
as it is in many parts of Canada.
Yeah.
How will the government of Quebec? What is it doing to crack down on these prayers outside churches and on the streets and what have you?
Well, what they're doing is they are actually following the lead of their own, the Pelchat-Rousseau Commission report, which came out a couple of months ago, which is their own government commission on secularism, which determined that street prayers, while it's an issue, it's not an urgent issue to deal with. However, it did suggest that this be foisted upon municipalities to deal with. That's something that was echoed by former Côte Saint-Luc councillor who recently retired, Dita Burku. She presented that as part of a plan to the City of Montreal, trying to get that on the debate during the last municipal election, and they said no, thank you. They didn't want to discuss it. But she had argued, as many people did, that municipalities are best placed to make those determinations, to issue permits, whether it be for a Lac Bomer parade or for Stations of the Cross, so that everybody, vivre ensemble is a big word in Quebec. Let's live well together. Let's get along. But that has to be worked at. And currently there are municipalities that issue permits for religious events in order to maintain control on the size and the scope of them so that they don't take over public spaces. The issue is a big one in Quebec. It's come to light over the last few months as more of these raucous, disruptive demonstrations we see downtown, these anti-Israel demonstrations, take a brief pause for street prayer, where anything from 12 to 60 people, get down on the street, often blocking traffic or sidewalks under the guise and protection of Montreal police. And that has led to counter protests, particularly in front of the Notre Dame Basilica, which is probably the most identifiable symbol of Quebec's Catholic heritage. So people are saying this is not a coincidence. This is about imposing a presence or trying to intimidate. Not all agree, but enough agree that there have been some pretty serious and determined counter protests and efforts to get this on the public agenda. The government has never been happy with these incidents and said it was going to act. And this is how it's going to act, by handing it down to municipalities. And it does make sense because, a town like Côte Saint-Luc, which has 50-something% Jews amongst its 37,000 plus population, has different considerations over public religious displays than, let's say, Ville Saint-Laurent, which has a very heavy Muslim population. So each municipality is going to have to determine best what they're going to do in keeping with the government mandate. Now, I do want to mention one thing. There is a fourth law that was passed that not too many people talk about or in the rest of Canada heard about, and that's Quebec's Bill 84, which was passed this summer. Bill 84 is an integration law, which is a tacit rejection of Canadian multiculturalism, both in practice and in policy.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
Why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Okay, I'm not understanding something. When we're talking about the street protests,
Yes.
how do these new laws cover this?
So currently, a lot of the
Public prayer.
A lot of the public prayer events that are happening, when they're happening in the street, they currently violate a number of municipal bylaws and the Quebec Highway Safety Code, and they're not; those laws are not being enforced. So the government is going to ban public prayer from streets, public spaces, including parks, unless the group has a municipal permit. Now, it's not clear what that means for a Christian group having a picnic in a park and everybody stands up to simultaneously recite
Say
a prayer.
grace or whatever it is, yeah.
Or to do tashlik at the park, as Jewish communities often do, throwing crumbs into the water.
What about menorahs for Hanukkah?
Correct. We've had examples like the town of Mount Royal banning menorahs but keeping a holiday tree. So these are things that arguably are best left to municipalities, and that's what the Quebec government is doing. So they're pushing off that responsibility and imposing that responsibility at the same time.
Why are they doing this so quickly now?
Well, let's be clear. None of this is a surprise. The government's been talking about this for years. After the last round of legislation was passed, there were questions about why they didn't go far enough and what was coming. But you see the intent and the activity on this legislation rising while the government's popularity is plummeting in the polls. The current provincial government under Premier François Legault, the Coalition Avenir Québec, better known as the CAQ, who hold 80 plus seats in I think it's 120 something seat assembly, is doing very poorly in the polls. And if there was an election held today, it might make third or fourth place. Now, the Parti Québécois, which currently has 6 seats, is really soaring in popularity, and it would like to go even farther. It would like to see bans on students wearing religious symbols. So the CAQ, clearly in free fall. It's got a crisis going with its doctors. It's got a crisis going with the poor investments by the government's investment arm. Therefore, every effort to reframe the public debate into something motivated voters can sink their teeth in seems like gold to the governing CAC, and the PQ's happy to play along.
What does this have to do with the scandal that you reported about, which found that some of the teachers in a certain school and others who were started to use their own freelancing, they deviated from the official curriculum?
Yeah, you're referring to l'affaire Bedford, the Bedford affair. That referred to an elementary school in Côte-des-Neiges. It's a population of 170,000 people in this borough. It's the most populous in Montreal. Bedford School, there was a serious dysfunction that began with sectarian factionalism within the staff between groups of Middle Eastern teachers and North African teachers, all Muslims, and complaints about staff not speaking French to each other. Now, that's a very sensitive thing in Quebec, people not speaking the official language. And it soon became known that there were reports of teachers praying in classrooms, of students being told that certain sports were not for girls, of the mandatory sex ed curriculum in Quebec not being taught in some classes, and even suggestions of alleged interference by a local mosque in some of the activities at the school or on school outings. It flew hard and hot on radio shows and on social media. There was discussion of it in the National Assembly, and the government appointed an investigator to investigate what was going on and found that the problem was a little bit more widespread, and ended up investigating 17 public schools in Quebec and found that this was an issue in a couple of them, and that to a degree, to be fair, a large part of it was just a lack of will on the part of management, of school administrators to do anything about it, feeling cowed or bullied by staff and by the community. So this was a very delicate topic, but again, I'll repeat what I've said for a long time and was repeated by former Israel Consul General Paul Hirschon recently, is that one of the fascinating things about Quebec is that it's always having an honest conversation with itself about identity, about self-image, about the future, about culture, about language, about how you want your grandchildren to live, what language they should speak. So they're not afraid to have these conversations. They're uncomfortable for some. There were 11 teachers suspended. The government said it's going to respond with changes to the Education Act that include mandatory teacher training, professional standards, reviews, and other measures like we're seeing in Bill 94 and the as yet to be named legislation that the government's hinting at coming out in the next 48 hours.
What did this is more important to me in terms of what the leaders of the Jewish community are saying. Is this going to be good for the Jewish community because it takes all religion out? Is it safer?
There was support from members of the Jewish community. CJA supported elements of Bill 94. They thought it was a good idea, and it would lead to some better dialogue amongst communities. There are a lot of Jews who feel that freedom from religion in the public space provides freedom for religion. Nobody should feel intimidated or ashamed or hesitant to practice their own or identify themselves, or how they express themselves, for fear of offending or being targeted by others. So some of these events are quite disturbing to people, particularly the ones downtown. So this is an issue. This is an issue that some people tried to get on the agenda in the last municipal elections on November 2nd across Quebec, but notably here on the island of Montreal, with very little luck. But there has been a big shift in culture and in power as of November 2nd, because
Valerie Plante did not run again.
Nope.
Most people in the Jewish community are happy to see the end of her.
Very polite characterization, Ellen.
Tell us about the new mayor and whether she is someone that the Jewish community thinks will be tougher on anti-Semitism, on protests, someone they can work with.
So it seems the Jewish community has held out high hopes for Soraya Martinez Ferrada, a former minister in the Trudeau government, and before that she was a city councillor in Saint Michel. She speaks often about her experiences as a refugee coming from Chile. So yes, the Jewish community has held out high hopes for her. Now here's the thing: most of the Jewish community on the island of Montreal does not live in the city of Montreal proper. So they don't vote for the mayor of Montreal. The issue is that the Montreal administration controls the agglomeration, which is the grouping of all island communities, the 19 boroughs of the city of Montreal, as well as the 14 independent municipalities on the island of Montreal, like Côte Saint-Luc, Hampstead, Westmount, Town of Mount Royal, Dollard-des-Ormeaux. That council governs shared services like police, fire, water, and transit. So if Côte Saint-Luc wants a change in the policing practices, it has to go to the Aglo, where by design, the independent municipalities are at a disadvantage. That's what's presented a real problem, because we've seen since October 8th, 2023, we've seen Montreal police clearly approach some of the, and I'm not talking about peaceful protests, we're talking about raucous protests with vile language being spewed, with clear efforts to intimidate and obstruct, handling it all with a white-gloved approach. Preferring to maintain order than enforce the law. Instead of police arresting them, what they're choosing to do is create a corridor for people to pass and say, okay, now everybody's accommodated. Well, that hasn't sufficed for many in the Jewish community, because what it has turned into is asking Jews to withdraw from public spaces for their own good. And we've seen too many examples of that. And so what a lot of Jewish community leaders and municipal leaders from the Jewish areas of quote unquote of Montreal, Hampstead, Côte Saint-Luc, were asking for clear shifts in policy, more aggressive policing, making full use of the tools available to them, i.e. the Criminal Code of Canada and municipal bylaws. The outgoing government of Projet Montréal wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't want to talk about it. And in fact, of the 400 plus candidates running for seats in the last election, 110 signed an anti-Israel pledge, an anti-apartheid pledge. Out of that 110 who signed, it was mostly from the two progressive parties. They lost pretty badly. The new party in power, Ensemble Montréal, with Soraya Martinez-Farada, holds out some good promise for the Jewish community in that in the largest borough, Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, the new mayor is Stephanie Valenzuela, the first Filipina mayor in Quebec, who is a staunch ally of the Jewish community. She formerly represented the district of Darlington, home to a lot of Orthodox Jews in Montreal, and she sits on council with her colleague Sonny Morose, the city's only Jewish councillor, city councillor in Snowdon. So, and this is where the home to the Jewish campus, and where some of the shootings of the schools have taken place, and the rioting around the community center. So there is hope. Efforts by the city of Côte Saint-Luc to get their plan for boosting security in the community were rebuffed. Maybe the new mayor who recently won that election will try to reintroduce that at the Aglo. That's a wait and see.
New era in Côte Saint-Luc municipal politics.
Certainly.
How come the mayor won by a vote and then lost by 50 votes?
So,
How did that happen? Brownstein.
On Sunday, November 2nd, as the votes were counted, the election workers called into the headquarters at City Hall the numbers. And by the time those numbers were finished being reported by phone by election workers, it seemed that the incumbent Mitch Brownstein, who had just completed 2 terms as mayor over 9 years, before serving previously for 25 years as a city councillor, he was ahead by 50 votes. Now that got a lot of tongues wagging. 50 votes, maybe there's room for a recount there. But the next morning, when the official tallies, the tally sheets that the workers filled out on paper, when those were calculated, it seemed that the challenger, David Torgman, was ahead by 1 vote, which suggested problems with phone calls, problems with addition, problems with data entry. So Mitch Brownstein decided to request a recount, which was granted on Thursday, November 13th. On the 14th, they began to recount every single ballot, about 8,600 ballots in 77 boxes that were schlepped from Côte Saint-Luc City Hall down to the Palais de Justice. And they came up with a new number, that Torgman was now 6 votes ahead. They had to end that early because many of the people working, including one of the candidates, was Shomer Shabbos, was a Shabbat observant, and pick it up again Monday when they discovered another box hadn't been added to the tally. In all, it was determined that David Torgman was ahead by 7 votes. At that point, Mitch Brownstein conceded, and reportedly with a very gracious embrace of his opponent, And so a new era begins in Côte Saint-Luc, which began Monday night with its first council meeting of the new mandate, which featured an observant Sephardi engineer as mayor, after Côte Saint-Luc's been governed for the better part of the last 20 years by Anglo-Ashkenazi lawyers with strong liberal connections. That would be Mitch Brownstein and current Mount Royal MP Anthony Housefather. And Mitch Brownstein tried to distance himself from his liberal connections a few weeks ago by resigning as the president of the Liberal EDA in Mount Royal, the Riding Association. And that came a few weeks after Côte Saint-Luc Council unanimously denounced Mark Carney's government and Mark Carney for recognition of Palestinian statehood. Now, that's something unheard of, the Côte Saint-Luc Council denouncing anything of a liberal government. Brownstein told me he didn't want to be seen as that guy anymore. He had to be the mayor of everybody, and he couldn't allow that to overshadow what his message was, which was to be a unifying mayor on behalf of all Côte Saint-Luc residents. For some, it wasn't enough. Torgman pulled in some of Brownstein's traditional supporters who were fed up with the liberal affiliations. Some people stayed home, and Torgman was able to pull more votes from his base from when he ran in 2021, when he lost by about 2,200 votes. But all that to say, with everything that's at stake, this still only represented 37% turnout for the mayoralty election, which is, I don't know how it is in the rest of the country, but it's kind of the going rate for
Calgary's recent election was 39.04% turnout, the lowest in nearly 2 decades.
Where was that?
Calgary, just
Really?
recently
39%.
when Jeremy Farkas came in. And Toronto in 2022, 29.7% elected Olivia Chow. The new guy is younger. He's a Sephardic. He's also a Canadian Armed Forces veteran.
Yeah, he has a broad worldview. He worked after the devastating earthquakes in Haiti as a UN project manager, and he tools around Côte Saint-Luc on his fancy motorcycle. But what's interesting to see is when you looked on the council meeting last night, you saw the center three members on this 9-member council all wearing kippahs. So that was something that you don't usually see in Côte Saint-Luc. In neighboring Hampstead, Jeremy Levi.
I was going to say, there is a kippah-wearing mayor in Hampstead, too.
He won re-election by a couple of dozen votes, but there was some taste for change because his challenger, Jack Ettery, almost pulled it off. And so Jeremy's back, as your listeners may know. Jeremy Levi is a controversial figure. He's very outspoken on anti-Semitism, on the liberal government, and Gaza. Sure. He's been dinged by many critics, and he welcomes it all. He takes it as a badge of honor.
Except that he has to face sort of a disciplinary hearing by his chartered accountant.
This is an odd one. The Order of Chartered Accountants of Quebec. Apparently, I don't know. I don't have all the details of this. They're trying to discipline him, and it might be related to some of his public statements about Gaza and the war, which is ironic. Which is funny to me because the chartered accountants organizations, like many other professional orders in Quebec, were completely bouche bée. That means, mum on the issue of the Quebec government telling them they have to communicate with all their members only in French. They didn't have a problem with that, but they're going after Jeremy Levi because he tweeted something about Gaza. So, maybe the accountants in our audience will have more, thoughts about why that's a big issue for them.
We're going to end here. It's a fascinating look.
And more coming. We're getting closer to an election season.
But also there's a big court challenge. The Supreme Court is going to hear the challenge to Bill 21 in the new year. Our listeners will follow your work and your articles on the cjn.ca website. Thanks a lot for catching us up on this.
Be well.
Jewish Canada sounds like for this fresh episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. I should mention that while some media outlets are reporting these new secularism laws will also outlaw teaching religion during class time in provincially subsidized private schools, Jewish leaders say they haven't seen the wording of the new bill yet and will wait until it's tabled before commenting, and of course we'll be following this very closely. North Star is produced by Andrea Varsany and Zachary Judah Kaufman. Michael Freeman is our executive producer, and Brett Higgins wrote the theme. Glad to be back on the airwaves, and thanks for listening.